I flew home for my dying dad's 80th birthday. My brother left him to rot and stole his life savings. He thought I was just a dumb carpenter. He didn't know I was about to own everything he had. The hum of the engine had become a part of me after the first 1,000 miles. It was a low, steady drone that vibrated through the seat, up my spine, a constant reminder of the distance I'd put between myself and the place I once called home. Oregon's green mountains had long since flattened into the endless, hypnotic plains of the Midwest. For 3 days, I'd been fueled by gas station coffee that tasted like burnt regret and the gnawing guilt that had been my shadow for the better part of a decade. My name is Caleb Thorne. I'm 42, and I build things with my hands. Custom furniture, mostly. Desks from reclaimed oak, chairs so perfectly balanced they feel like an extension of you. I like the certainty of wood. You can see its grain, feel its strength. You know where you stand with it. It's honest. It's everything my brother, Brett, is not. I was driving back to Wisconsin for my father's 80th birthday. A milestone. The kind you don't miss. Except I'd missed so many other things. Christmases, Thanksgivings, a handful of smaller birthdays. The work is here, Dad. I'd say over the phone, the excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. The truth was I'd run. I ran from the suffocating judgment of my family, from the memory of my mother's funeral, where Brett, ever the financial advisor, had discussed estate planning over limp sandwiches. Most of all, I ran from the promise I'd made to my mom on her deathbed. Look after your father, Caleb. He's a good man, but he's not a fighter. And Brett, just watch out for Brett. I'd failed. I knew it. My monthly wire transfers into their joint account felt less like help and more like hush money for my conscience. Beside me on the passenger seat, wrapped in an old flannel shirt, was his gift. A memory box I'd spent the last month carving from a single block of walnut. Intricate dovetail joints, a lid inlaid with a small, stylized compass rose. It was the best work I'd ever done. A silent apology for all the years of distance. My last call with Dad a week ago had been unsettling. His voice was a reedy whisper, full of confusing pauses. When I'd mentioned the trip, he'd seemed surprised, almost as if he didn't know. I'd called Brett right after. "Oh, yeah, Dad's fine," Brett had said, his voice slick and dismissive, the way it always was when talking to me. A little forgetful. You know how it is. "Don't worry your head about it, little brother. I've got everything under control here. Just focus on your woodwork." He said woodwork like it was a dirty word, like it was something a child did in the garage. He never understood that I wasn't just playing with wood. I was building a life, an honest one. As I crossed the state line into Wisconsin, a cold dread settled in my stomach. It was more than just the guilt now. It was a premonition. The low hum of the engine suddenly sounded like a warning. The old house looked tired. The lawn was a week overdue for a mow, and a loose shutter banged a lonely rhythm against the siding in the crisp October wind. It was the house I grew up in, the one my father, Robert, had built with his own father. The one I'd helped him re-roof the summer I turned 16. Now it looked neglected. I parked my dusty truck behind a gleaming new SUV I didn't recognize, probably Brett's latest toy. There were no balloons on the mailbox, no festive banner across the porch. A knot tightened in my gut. I grabbed the gift and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. The silence inside was the first thing that hit me. It was a heavy, cold silence, the kind that absorbs sound. The air was stale and smelled faintly of dust and decay. "Dad," I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. "Brett?" "Chloe." "Nothing." I walked through the entryway into the living room, and that's when I saw him. My father was sitting in his old armchair, which had been replaced by a standard-issue medical wheelchair. He was staring out the window, a thin, cheap-looking blanket draped over his knees. He was so much smaller than I remembered, his frame shrunken, his skin pale and translucent. He wore a stained t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. He didn't turn. On the coffee table in front of him sat a small, grocery store birthday cake. The blue frosting was sweating and starting to collapse on one side, a single, unlit candle listing like the mast of a sinking ship. Next to the cake was a single sheet of paper, torn from a legal pad. My heart hammered against my ribs. I moved closer, my boots silent on the worn rug. "Dad," I said softly, touching his shoulder. He startled, turning his head slowly. His eyes were watery and unfocused. It took a long second for recognition to flicker. "Caleb," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. You came." "Of course I came, Dad. It's your birthday." He looked back at the window. "They said they had errands. Important business. They said they'd be back for the party." My eyes fell on the note on the table. It was Brett's familiar, arrogant scrawl. "Took the final $50K from the account to handle an urgent investment opportunity. We'll talk later." Brett, $50,000. That was the last of it. That was the money meant to pay off the second mortgage, the money that was supposed to keep this roof over his head. A wave of nausea and white-hot rage washed over me. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked from a note to the sad, melting cake to my frail, confused father. My immediate reaction wasn't a scream. It was to act. "It's cold in here, Dad," I said, my voice tight. I walked over to the thermostat. It was turned off. I switched the heat on, the old furnace groaning to life in the basement. I then went to the hall closet and pulled out the heavy wool blanket Mom had loved, draping it over his shoulders and tucking it around his legs. He leaned into my touch, a faint sigh escaping his lips. I let this happen. The thought was a drumbeat in my head. I stayed away, sent my money, and I let this happen. The guilt was gone. In its place was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. I spent the next hour making the house feel like a home again. I made Dad a cup of tea, the way he liked it, strong, with a splash of milk. I found some leftovers in the fridge and warmed them up for him. While he ate, slowly and deliberately, I moved through the house like a ghost, taking inventory of the neglect. Dust lay thick on the family photos. A stack of unopened mail, mostly bills, sat on the kitchen counter. I found the checkbook for the joint account in the desk drawer. The last entry was the one from today. The balance was now $17.34. Below it, I found a stack of letters from the bank, all marked urgent. They were foreclosure warnings. Brett hadn't just been hiding them. He'd been letting the house bleed out. My hand started to tremble, a low tremor of pure adrenaline. I needed to do something, anything, before the rage consumed me. I walked out the back door and headed for the one place that had always been my sanctuary, Dad's workshop. It was just as I remembered it, yet different. A layer of dust covered everything, and the air was cold and still. The old lathe, the table saw, the neat rows of hand tools hanging on the pegboard. They were all there, silent witnesses. This was where Dad had taught me the value of honest work. "Measure twice, cut once," he'd always say. A lesson Brett had never learned. I saw a half-finished block of basswood on the workbench. I picked up a carving knife, its handle worn smooth from years of my father's grip. I didn't have a plan. I just started carving. The blade bit into the wood, and with each slice, I let a piece of the fury out. Chips flew. My breath came in ragged bursts. I wasn't creating anything. I was destroying. I was channeling the ugly, jagged anger inside me into the wood, shaving it down, try to find something solid and clean underneath. The tremor in my hand stopped, replaced by the familiar ache of focused labor. After what felt like an hour, I was leaning against the bench, breathing heavily, the mangled piece of wood in my hand. I felt calmer, colder. I went back inside. Dad was dozing in his chair. I sat on the ottoman in front of him, just watching him breathe. After a few minutes, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, the fog seemed to lift. There was clarity in his gaze. He reached out a shaky hand and gripped my arm. His voice was barely a whisper, urgent and conspiratorial. "Caleb," he breathed. "The old tea caddy in the pantry. Mom's." His eyes darted around the room, as if he was afraid of being overheard. "The key is inside. Don't let him take the workshop." And then, just as quickly as it came, the clarity was gone. His eyes glazed over again, and his hand fell away. But he had given me something. A mission. A clue. I went to the pantry. In the back, behind a row of canned goods, was the old floral tea caddy Mom had kept for decades. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled amongst dried tea leaves, was a small, old-fashioned skeleton key. It wasn't just a key. It was a mandate. My father was still in there, fighting in his own quiet way. And he had just handed me a weapon. The next morning, the gleaming SUV pulled into the driveway again. The front door burst open, and in walked Brett and my sister, Chloe, armed with pastel balloons and a bakery box. They were a vision of forced cheer. "Happy belated birthday, Dad." Brett boomed, his voice a pitch too high. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking polo shirt, a stark contrast to the threadbare state of the house. Chloe, all pearls and a tight, bright smile, rushed to Dad's side. "We brought you those cupcakes you love from that little shop downtown. We are so sorry about yesterday, some last-minute business fires we had to put out." They moved around him with an exaggerated affection that made my stomach turn. They didn't seem to notice the heat was on, or that the house was cleaner. They didn't notice the fresh tea I'd made, sitting on the end table. They only had eyes for their performance. Brett saw me, standing in the kitchen archway. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Caleb, look at you, still playing the simple Carpenter, huh? Decided to grace us with your presence." "I came for Dad's birthday," I said, my voice level. "The one that was yesterday." Chloe shot me a warning look. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Caleb. We're making it up to him today. We're all family here." As they fussed over Dad, I felt a memory surface. A Christmas from years ago. I'd made Dad a beautiful, hand-turned wooden bowl. He'd been so proud, showing it to everyone. Later, I'd overheard Brett talking to Chloe in the kitchen. "It's sweet, I guess," he'd said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But what's he going to do with it? It's not an investment. It's just a thing. Honestly, it's a waste of his time. Money is what matters. Money is what's real." That was the core of it. To him, anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet was worthless. My work, my relationship with our father, love itself, it was all just sentimental nonsense. He clapped his hands together, pulling me from the memory. "All right, now that Caleb's here, we can get some business taken care of. Make it official." He placed a thick folder on the coffee table. "I've had my lawyer draw this up," he announced to the room. "It's a reverse mortgage agreement. It'll unlock the equity in the house, give us a steady stream of cash to make sure Dad has the absolute best care. All we need is a signature." He slid the folder towards me. "We'll need you to sign as a witness." A formality. I stared at the folder. The paper dagger. He wasn't just stealing the money. He was trying to legally seize the house, the last tangible piece of our family's history, and he wanted me to be an accomplice. "No," I said. The cheerful atmosphere evaporated. Brett's smile vanished. "Excuse me?" I said no. I repeated, looking him dead in the eye. "I'm not signing anything." The standoff was broken by the ringing of Brett's phone. He shot me a venomous glare before stepping into the hallway to take the call. Chloe immediately launched into her role as the peacemaker. "Caleb, please," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Don't make this difficult. Brett knows what he's doing. This is for Dad's own good. We're just trying to protect his legacy." "Whose legacy?" I shot back. "His or yours?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Before she could answer, Brett came back in, his face pale. "That was Leo's school," he said, his voice tight. "He's sick. I have to go pick him up." It was a transparently bad lie, but I didn't care. I just wanted them gone. They made their excuses to Dad, promised to be back later to finalize the paperwork, and hurried out, leaving a trail of hollow promises and the sickly sweet smell of cupcakes behind them. I spent the rest of the day with Dad. We looked through old photo albums, and I told him stories about my life in Oregon, about the mountains and the ocean. He was mostly quiet, but sometimes he would smile, a genuine spark in his eyes. That evening, after I'd gotten Dad settled into bed, there was a soft knock on the back door. I opened it to find my nephew, Leo, standing on the porch, his shoulders hunched inside his hoodie. He was 17, with the same sharp eyes as his father, but none of the arrogance. "Is my dad here?" he asked, his voice low. "No, he's gone." He seemed to relax. Can I talk to you for a minute?" I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, refusing to meet my eyes. "I wasn't sick," he said finally. "I heard them arguing in the car on the way over here. About you. About the house." He pulled out his phone, his thumb shaking slightly as he scrolled through it. He turned the screen towards me. It was a screenshot of a text chain between Brett and Chloe. "Brett, he's here. being difficult as expected. We need to push the mortgage through before he gets any smart ideas. Chloe, just handle it. We can't let him ruin this. The optics would be terrible. Brett, don't worry. He's just a carpenter. He doesn't understand this world. We'll get him to sign. We just need to make sure his name isn't on a single original document. I stared at the screen, the words burning into my brain. It was all there. The intent, the conspiracy, the utter contempt they had for me. I'm sorry, Uncle Caleb, Leo whispered, his voice thick with shame. My dad, he wasn't at my last baseball game. He said he had a client dinner. But you called me the next day. You asked me how it went. You always ask. He looked up at me then, his eyes pleading for understanding. I know what you did for Grandma. I remember. You were here. They weren't. In that moment, the fight stopped being just about me and my father. It was about this kid, too. About the kind of men we were supposed to be. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Leo. This means more than you know. You did the right thing. Leo's screenshot was the first brick in my new foundation. The next morning, armed with the old key from the tea caddy, I went looking for a lock. It didn't fit any of the doors or chests in the house. Then I remembered the old roll-top desk in the workshop, the one Dad never used anymore. The key slid in perfectly. With a soft click, the lock opened. I rolled back the wooden cover. Inside was a small, metal lockbox. My heart pounded as I lifted it out. It was heavy. I carried it back to the kitchen table and pried it open. It was filled with my father's most treasured documents. His honorable discharge from the Army, my parents' marriage certificate, and tucked at the bottom, in a sealed envelope, was his original, notarized last will and testament. I read it with trembling hands. It was simple and clear. The house, the workshop, and what little savings he had were to be left to me, his son, Caleb Thorne. Brett and Chloe were to receive a token amount, along with his love and forgiveness. It was dated 5 years ago, shortly after Mom's death. It was ironclad. He knew. Even back then, he knew who they were. My next call was to a name I found in the lockbox. Mr. Arthur Goldstein, attorney at law. An old school name. I remembered him from my childhood. A kind, serious man who smelled of old books and peppermint. Goldstein, a gravelly voice answered. Mr. Goldstein, my name is Caleb Thorne. Robert Thorne's son. There was a pause on the line. Caleb, my goodness. It's been a long time. I was sorry to hear you'd moved so far away. Mr. Goldstein, I have a question for you. Did my father ever change his will? The pause this time was longer, heavier. That's a complicated question, son. About 3 years ago, your brother Brett came to my office. He brought a document with him, a waiver of inheritance purportedly signed by you. He said you wanted to be free of any family obligations, that you were cutting ties completely. He wanted to draft a new trust that made him and your sister the sole beneficiaries. And did you? I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. No, I did not, Goldstein said firmly. The signature didn't look right to me. It lacked character. And frankly, the story didn't sound like the boy I remembered. I told your brother that unless you came into my office personally, with 2 forms of identification, I wouldn't touch your father's will. I haven't heard from him since. He coughed. I still have the original will filed right here in my office, Caleb. It's safe. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. You have no idea what that means to me. I think I do, son, he said gently. I think I do. After I hung up, I opened my laptop. I created a new folder on the desktop. I named it the Blueprint. I scanned the will, the foreclosure notices. I uploaded the screenshot from Leo. I started a log, documenting every conversation, every discovery. I was no longer just a son. I was a builder, and I was laying the foundation for a reckoning. The call from Chloe came 2 days later. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. Caleb, hi. Listen, Brett and I have been talking. We feel like there's been so much tension, and we want to clear the air. We're having a little family meeting on Sunday. Just us, a few cousins, Uncle Mark. We want to present a unified plan for Dad's future. It's really important that you're there. A unified plan. I knew exactly what that meant. It was an ambush. They were going to gather the extended family, paint me as the difficult, ungrateful son, and pressure me into signing their papers in front of an audience. They wanted to use the weight of family opinion to crush me. I'll be there, I said, my voice calm. Oh, wonderful, she chirped, unable to hide the relief in her voice. It's at Brett's house. Sunday at noon. So glad we can finally get on the same page. She had no idea what page I was on. For the next 3 days, I worked. I didn't sleep much. I spent hours on the phone with Mr. Goldstein. He connected me with a sharp, young lawyer in a neighboring town, someone with no ties to my family. Her name was Anya Sharma. She was a specialist in elder law and financial fraud. I drove to her office and laid out the blueprint. She listened intently, her expression growing sterner with each document I showed her. This is more than just a family squabble, Mr. Thorne, she said when I finished. This is a textbook case of elder exploitation and attempted fraud. The reverse mortgage they're pushing is predatory, especially given your father's cognitive state. We spent the afternoon drafting a strategy. It was quiet, methodical, and precise. It was a Carpenter's plan. On Saturday, I made 2 more visits. The first was to Maria, my mom's best friend, a retired hospice nurse who lived down the street. I told her everything. She wasn't surprised. I've seen it, Caleb, she said, her eyes sad. I've seen how they talk to him when they think no one is listening. I asked her if she would be willing to come to the meeting as a guest, a friend of the family there to support my father. She agreed without hesitation. The second visit was to my father. He was having a good day. We sat on the porch, and I told him simply and clearly what Brett and Chloe were trying to do. I told him I was going to fight it. He looked at me, his gaze steady. You're a good boy, Caleb. You have my strength, your mother's heart. Do what you have to do. On Sunday morning, I put on my best shirt, a clean pair of jeans, and my work boots. I wasn't going to dress like them. I was going to walk in as myself. In my canvas messenger bag, I carried my blueprint. The stage was set, but the play wasn't theirs. It was mine. Brett's house was a monument to his insecurity. It was a sprawling, sterile McMansion with soaring ceilings and no soul. The air smelled of air freshener and new money. About a dozen family members were gathered in the sunroom, a bright, uncomfortable space filled with beige furniture. They all stopped talking when I walked in. I saw my father in a chair by the fireplace, looking small and lost. Maria was already there, sitting beside him, holding his hand. Caleb, Brett said, striding forward with a politician's smile. Glad you could make it. Grab a seat. We have a lot to discuss. He gestured to a single, isolated chair in the corner, as if I were a defendant. I ignored him and pulled a chair up next to my father. I squeezed his shoulder. He looked up and gave me a faint, grateful smile. The performance began. Brett and Chloe stood in front of a large flat-screen TV, a united front of feigned concern. As you all know, Brett began, his voice smooth and practiced. Dad's health has been declining. Chloe and I have been managing his care, and it's been challenging. Chloe took over, and we've been trying to include Caleb, but his distance has made things difficult. Then came the slideshow. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Photos of me on a hiking trip in Oregon, captioned while Dad needed him. A picture of me at a friend's wedding, captioned, choosing friends over family. They'd cropped and twisted my life into a narrative of selfish abandonment. With each slide, I could feel the mood in the room shifting, the sympathetic glances turning to judgmental stares. I said nothing. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on my knees. I let them talk. I let them dig their own graves. My silence seemed to unnerve them. They got louder, more dramatic, their gestures growing wider. Finally, they presented their endgame. A stack of papers was passed around. This is a comprehensive care agreement, Brett announced. It designates Chloe and me as Dad's sole financial and medical guardians. It also includes a clause, which we felt was necessary for legal clarity, where Caleb waives any future claim to the estate in recognition of his limited involvement. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. We just need you to sign, Caleb, to show everyone we're finally on the same page. For Dad, the room was silent. Every eye was on me. They were expecting me to yell, to argue, to storm out. I didn't. I calmly reached into my messenger bag and pulled out my own folder. I stood up, walked to the TV, and disconnected Brett's laptop. I plugged in my own. You've all seen Brett's presentation, I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. Now, I'd like to show you mine. I didn't have a slideshow. I just had the truth. I opened a first file. It was a high-resolution scan of the foreclosure notice from a bank. A collective gasp went through the room. "This is the care my father has been receiving," I said. Next, I opened the screenshot from Leo's phone. I didn't read it aloud. I just let everyone see the words for themselves. Chloe turned white as a sheet. Then, I opened the scan of the original will, the one from Mr. Goldstein's office. This was my father's wish. Before he was sick, before he was vulnerable. I looked at Brett, whose face was a mask of disbelief and rage. "You're right about one thing, Brett," I said, my voice still quiet. "Money is real, and this is a real attempt to commit fraud." The air in the sunroom was thick with unspoken accusations. My cousins and uncle stared, mouths agape, shifting their gaze between me and my siblings. Brett had lost his smug composure. His face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists. This is taken out of context," he sputtered, gesturing wildly at the screen. "You're twisting things, Caleb. You always do this." I didn't respond to him. I simply opened the next file. "This last one," I said, addressing the room, "is a video." I hit play. The screen filled with my father's face. The video had been taken a few days prior, in his own living room. He was sitting upright in his chair, wearing his favorite old flannel shirt. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. Beside him, just in frame, sat Maria. "State your name for the record, please," Maria's calm voice said off-screen. "Robert Thorne," my father said, his voice weak but steady. "And do you know today's date?" He gave the correct date. "Mr. Thorne," Maria continued gently, "you've asked me to record this statement. Can you tell us why?" My father looked directly into the camera lens, as if he were looking each person in that room in the eye. "Because," he said slowly, "I need my family to hear it from me. Not from a piece of paper somebody else wrote. Not from a story somebody else is telling." He took a breath. "My son, Brett, and my daughter, Chloe, I love them, but they see me as a problem to be managed. A balance sheet. My son, Caleb," he paused, and his expression softened. "Caleb sees me. He always has. He has my strength. He has his mother's heart. I trust him. I want him to be in charge of my affairs. I want him to have the house. It's his legacy. He knows what to do with it." The video ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was broken by Chloe, who let out a strangled sob. Brett, however, was not done. "Coached," he barked, his voice cracking. "He's not a sound mind. That video means nothing. Maria, you're a nurse. You manipulated him." Maria stood up, her small frame radiating an authority that silenced him. "As a registered nurse for 40 years, I am well-versed in assessing cognitive capacity. Robert was perfectly lucid during that recording, and I am prepared to testify to that fact under oath." That's when I played my final card. I walked to the coffee table and placed a thick blue-backed legal document on top of Brett's worthless papers. "This," I said, "is a durable power of attorney and an amended, legally filed trust, making me the sole executor and beneficiary of the Thorne estate. It was signed by my father 3 weeks ago in the presence of his new lawyer, Ms. Anya Sharma, and a certified notary. It supersedes any and all previous documents." I let that sink in. Then I added the final cut. "And as for the lake house you sold last year to fund your business," I looked directly at Brett, "I hope you got a good price for it. Because I tracked the tax delinquency on the property and I bought it back at a county auction last month. The deed is in my name." That was it. The final blow. Brett stared at me, his face a grotesque mixture of shock and hatred. He let out an incoherent roar and lunged across the table toward me. But my uncle and a cousin were faster, grabbing his arms and holding him back as he thrashed and cursed. The performance was over. The masks had been shattered. I looked at my brother, a man undone by his own greed, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. The family meeting didn't so much end as it did dissolve. Amid Chloe's weeping and Brett's impotent rage, people just started to leave, muttering apologies and avoiding my eyes. They had come for spectacle, and they had gotten one, just not the one they were expecting. I helped my father to his feet, and with Maria's assistance, We walked slowly out of that cold, sterile house, leaving my siblings to the wreckage they had created. The fallout was swift and brutal, though I had little to do with it directly. My uncle, a man who valued family honor above all else, was appalled by what he had witnessed. He was a partner at a small but respected local accounting firm, the same firm that handled the books for many of Brett's clients. An anonymous tip was made to the State Financial Regulatory Board. An investigation was opened. It turned out Brett's investment opportunities were little more than a poorly constructed Ponzi scheme. He was using new client money to pay off old ones, all while funding his lavish lifestyle. The $50,000 he'd taken from my father was a desperate attempt to plug a hole in a rapidly sinking ship. He was charged with multiple counts of fraud and elder exploitation. His world collapsed. Chloe, mired in the social and financial scandal, filed for divorce a few months later. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was no victory in watching my family tear itself apart. My goal had never been revenge. It had been preservation. A few weeks after that disastrous Sunday, I drove to the cemetery. The sky was a crisp, clear blue, and the autumn leaves were a riot of color. I stood before my mother's grave, the simple granite stone cool beneath my fingertips. I brought something with me. It was a small, intricately carved wooden rose, its petals so thin they were almost translucent. I'd made it from the same block of walnut as Dad's memory box. I set the rose down on the stone. "I'm sorry it took me so long," I whispered to the quiet air. "But I'm taking care of him now. I'm home. I kept my promise, Mom." Finally, a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying, a deep, persistent ache of guilt that had settled in my bones for a decade, finally began to lift. I stood there for a long time, the cool breeze on my face, feeling not triumphant, not even happy, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The job was done. I took Dad to the lake house the following weekend. It was a small, rustic cabin nestled among tall pines, the place where we'd spent the best summers of my childhood. Brett had let it fall into disrepair, but the bones were good. The foundation was strong. I'd spent a week there after buying it back, patching the roof, fixing the plumbing, and sanding down the old wooden deck that overlooked the water. We arrived just as the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The lake was as still as glass, mirroring the brilliant colors above. I helped Dad out of the truck and into his wheelchair, and we sat together on the deck, a thick wool blanket across his lap. He didn't say much, but he didn't need to. He just stared out at the water, a look of deep contentment on his face. This was his place. This was where he belonged. After a while, I went inside and came back with a small cake I'd baked that morning. It was a simple chocolate cake, made from scratch. Not a sad, store-bought afterthought. I placed a single candle in the center and lit it. The small flame flickered in the evening breeze. "Happy 80th, Dad," I said softly. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear again. That familiar fog momentarily lifted. A slow smile spread across his lips. He looked at the cake, then at me. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. We sat there in the twilight, sharing the cake, the silence comfortable and complete. The celebration wasn't loud or crowded. It was quiet, and it was real. As I was cutting him a second piece, he reached out and took my hand. He turned it over, his thumb tracing the calluses on my palm. He looked from my hand to my face. "You have good hands," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Strong hands, just like your grandfather." Tears welled in my eyes, and this time I didn't fight them. In that one moment, I felt a validation so pure and powerful it eclipsed all the money, all the property, all the fighting. It was the inheritance I had truly come home for. It was the only one that mattered. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep a little over a year later. He spent his final months at the lake house, surrounded by the scent of pine and the sound of lapping water. He was calm, and he was home. I didn't sell the house in town. I couldn't. It was too much a part of him, of me. For months, I just let it sit, the workshop silent, the rooms empty. I knew I had to do something with it, to give it new purpose. The idea came to me one evening as I was looking at my father's old tools, each one a testament to a life of creation. Brett's legacy was one of destruction, of taking and breaking. My father's legacy, and mine, had to be the opposite. It had to be about building. 6 months later, the old house was reborn. I had converted it into the Thorn Workshop, a veterans retreat. It wasn't a charity in the traditional sense. It was a place for veterans, men and women who were struggling to find their footing after their service, to come and learn a trade. I taught them carpentry. We worked side by side in the old workshop, transforming rough timber into beautiful, functional pieces of furniture. We didn't just build tables and chairs. We rebuilt confidence. We restored a sense of purpose. We created a new kind of family, one forged in sawdust and mutual respect. The main house became a residence for them, a quiet, stable place to live while they got back on their feet. It was filled with noise and life again, but it was a different kind of noise, the sound of hammering, of laughter, of men and women sharing stories over a meal cooked in the kitchen my mother once commanded. One afternoon, I was in the workshop showing a young Marine how to make a clean cut with a dovetail saw. He was struggling, his hands unsteady, his frustration growing. "Easy now," I said, placing my hand over his. "Don't force it. Feel the wood. Let the saw do the work. Measure twice, cut once." He took a deep breath, relaxed his grip, and guided the saw through the wood. The cut was perfect. He looked up at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. It was a smile I recognized. It was the same smile my father had given me all those years ago. In that moment, I understood. A true legacy isn't something you inherit in a will or a bank account. It's not something you can steal or cheat your way into. It's the skills you pass on, the values you instill, the lives you touch. It's the quiet act of building something good and lasting in a world that's too often focused on tearing things down. I hadn't just won a fight. I had built a piece. And in the steady, rhythmic sound of the saw cutting through wood, I could hear my father's voice, and I knew he would be proud.